The Conglomerates Downfall. The Architect's Gambit. Part 1. Foundations of Deceit. Thomas Harrington stood at the window of his downtown office, watching rain streak down the glass as the city lights blurred into watercolor smudges. At 43, he had built Harrington Systems Integration into a respected mid-tier technology firm specializing in cybersecurity infrastructure. The company represented 15 years of relentless work, innovation, and sacrifice. What he didn't know was that his wife of 12 years, Rebecca, had begun systematically undermining everything he had built. Rebecca Harrington had once been his partner in every sense. They'd met in graduate school, both with dreams of technological innovation. But as Thomas's company grew, Rebecca's resentment had quietly festered. She'd expected to be his equal in the business venture, not relegated to the background as the supportive spouse. This bitterness made her vulnerable when she met Victor Blackwood. Victor was the 49-year-old heir to Blackwood Industries, a sprawling technology conglomerate whose true reach extended far beyond its publicly acknowledged holdings. The Blackwood family name opened doors throughout corporate America and political circles, their charitable foundation a perfect cover for influence peddling and information gathering. Their affair began innocuously, a chance meeting at a charity gala, a shared interest in emerging technologies, coffee meetings that turned into long lunches. But Victor saw Rebecca not just as a conquest but as an asset. He recognized her technical brilliance, her knowledge of Harrington Systems' proprietary security protocols, and most importantly, her growing resentment toward her husband. "Your husband doesn't appreciate what he has," Victor told her during a weekend at his Hamptons estate while his wife was in Europe. "Someone with your insights should be driving innovation, not standing in the shadows." Rebecca was both flattered and strategic in her response. "Thomas has no idea what I've contributed all these years. The core encryption architecture. Mine, the adaptive firewall system that won the government contract. My work." Victor smiled, knowing he'd found the perfect informant. "Perhaps it's time the world saw your true value." Over the following months, Rebecca began extracting Harrington Systems' client data, security protocols, and proprietary algorithms, passing them to Victor under the guise of consulting on Blackwood's new security division. What she didn't realize was that Victor was using this information not just to bolster Blackwood Industries but to compromise the security of dozens of Harrington's clients, creating backdoors into government agencies, financial institutions, and defense contractors. Thomas, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the betrayal unfolding around him. Attributing his wife's renewed passion and late nights to a midlife renaissance rather than infidelity and industrial espionage. Part 2. The Unraveling. The first sign came when Thomas noticed anomalies in the network access logs. Someone using Rebecca's credentials was accessing server compartments she had no reason to explore. Initially, he dismissed it as a technical glitch or perhaps Rebecca researching for a project she hadn't mentioned. Then came the mysterious client defections, all migrating to a new Blackwood Industries security initiative. At an industry conference, a colleague mentioned seeing Rebecca dining intimately with Victor Blackwood. Still, Thomas resisted the obvious conclusion, until the night he forgot his laptop at home and returned unexpectedly. Rebecca was on a video call in his home office, screen sharing Harrington Systems' newest security protocol, one that hadn't even been implemented yet, with Victor Blackwood himself. "This backdoor access point will give you everything you need," she was saying. "Thomas hasn't even realized that I have modified the code baseline." Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, his world collapsing as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Not just his marriage, but his company, his client's security, his life's work, all compromised. Rather than confronting her immediately, Thomas retreated unseen. Strategic thinking had built his company, it would now be his salvation. He needed proof, understanding, and a plan. Over the next weeks, Thomas documented everything. He hired private investigators, cybersecurity specialists, and forensic accountants. The picture that emerged was far more extensive than he'd imagined. The Blackwood empire, it turned out, had been built on corporate espionage spanning decades. Victor's father had pioneered the approach, but Victor had perfected it, seducing the spouses or close associates of targeted executives, extracting information through these emotional connections. Then using that information not just for competitive advantage but for blackmail and market manipulation. Harrington Systems was just the latest target in a long history of conquests. The FBI had suspected the Blackwoods for years but had never gathered sufficient evidence for prosecution. The family's political connections had shielded them from serious investigation. Thomas decided to change that. Part 3. The Countermove. Thomas's first call was to an old college friend who now worked at the FBI's Cybercrimes Division. After signing non-disclosure agreements, Thomas presented his evidence. Access logs, modified code, recorded conversations, financial trails showing how Rebecca had begun moving assets to offshore accounts. "This isn't just about my company," Thomas explained. "The Blackwoods have compromised national security. The backdoors they've created could give access to critical infrastructure, defense systems, financial networks. The FBI assigned a team specializing in corporate espionage and national security threats. But they needed more. They needed to catch Victor and Rebecca in the act of transmitting stolen information and clearly establish their intent." Working with federal agents, Thomas implemented a counterintelligence operation. He created falsified, breakthrough, security protocols, digital honeypots designed to track and trace anyone who attempted to access or implement them. Then he ensured Rebecca would discover them. "I'm close to something big," he mentioned casually over dinner, knowing she was recording their conversations. "The Pentagon is interested. This could transform the company." As predicted, Rebecca took the bait. That weekend, when she believed Thomas was at a conference in Chicago, she copied the falsified protocols and met Victor at a private airstrip where his corporate jet awaited. "This is it," she told him, handing over a secured drive. "With this, you'll have access to everything: defense contracts, intelligence agencies, critical infrastructure systems." Thomas has no idea what he's actually created. Victor smiled, taking the drive. "And Harrington Systems will be finished within 6 months, Rebecca replied. "The security flaws we've built in will be discovered, they'll lose every government contract, and you can acquire the remnants for pennies on the dollar. And your husband?" Rebecca's laugh was cold. "Once the company collapses, I'll file for divorce. My separate accounts are already established. He'll never connect me to any of this." As federal agents closed in, recording every word, Thomas watched through surveillance cameras, the final pieces of his former life crumbling before his eyes. Part 4. Justice and Consequences. The arrests made national headlines. Victor Blackwood, son of one of America's most powerful families, charged with industrial espionage, conspiracy against the United States, computer fraud, and dozens of other federal crimes. Rebecca Harrington, charged as co-conspirator, faced similar charges plus insider trading and violation of multiple security clearances. But the investigation didn't stop there. Armed with Victor's seized devices and cooperative witnesses fearing prosecution, the FBI unraveled decades of Blackwood operations. Other victims came forward, former employees turned state's evidence, and international authorities joined the investigation as Blackwood's operations proved global in scope. The Blackwood corporate empire imploded in real time. Stock values plummeted, board members resigned, and partner companies severed ties frantically. The family's charitable foundation was revealed as a money laundering operation, their political connections abandoned them, and their social standing evaporated overnight. For Thomas, the professional vindication brought little personal comfort. The trial was brutal. Rebecca showed no remorse, instead painting herself as Victor's victim and Thomas as an emotionally distant workaholic who had driven her to betrayal. The jury didn't buy it, but the public scrutiny of his failed marriage added humiliation to injury. Harrington Systems survived but was deeply wounded. Many clients remained loyal after Thomas demonstrated that the security breaches had been contained, but rebuilding trust would take years. The company's valuation had been halved, and competitors circled like vultures. Part 5. Reconstruction. A year after the arrests, Thomas sat in his newly downsized office. The company had survived by refocusing on its core competencies, implementing radical transparency with clients, and developing new security protocols specifically designed to prevent insider threats. Professionally, the path forward was clear, if difficult. Personally, Thomas remained adrift. The divorce was finalized, the house sold, his personal history rewritten by betrayal. Trust seemed a foreign concept, relationship an impossibility. At his lawyer's insistence, Thomas began seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and betrayal. "You've survived the worst kind of personal and professional betrayal imaginable," she told him. "That you're functioning at all is remarkable. That you saved your company is extraordinary." "I don't feel extraordinary," Thomas admitted. "I feel hollow." "That's where we start rebuilding," she replied. "Not from strength, but from honesty about our wounds." The process was slow, painful, and nonlinear. There were days when anger consumed him, nights when loneliness seemed insurmountable. But gradually, Thomas began reconnecting with old friends, rediscovering interests beyond work, and rebuilding his capacity for joy. An unexpected turning point came when he was asked to guest lecture at his alma mater about business ethics and cybersecurity. Among the faculty attending was Professor Elena Mercer, a computer science ethicist whose pointed questions challenged Thomas's perspective. Their intellectual sparring continued over coffee, then dinner, evolving into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. Elena had experienced her own betrayals, a plagiarizing colleague who had stolen her research, and understood Thomas's wariness. "Trust isn't about finding people who will never hurt you," she told him months later as their relationship deepened. "It's about choosing people who are committed to repairing the hurt when it happens." Part 6. New Foundations. 5 years after the collapse of his marriage, Thomas Harrington stood again at a window, watching rain streak down glass. But this time, the view was of a university campus where he now taught part-time, sharing his hard-won wisdom with the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. Harrington Systems had evolved into a smaller but more robust company, specializing in insider threat protection and ethical cybersecurity practices. Thomas had stepped down as CEO, taking the role of chief security architect, allowing him to focus on innovation rather than administration. His personal life had similarly transformed. His relationship with Elena had progressed with deliberate care, both of them bringing their scars and wisdom to build something resilient rather than merely passionate. They maintained separate homes but shared values, interests, and increasingly, a future. Meanwhile, the aftershocks of the Blackwood collapse continued reverberating through corporate America. Reform legislation bearing Thomas's input had strengthened protections against corporate espionage. Several former Blackwood executives served prison terms, while others turned state's evidence, revealing decades of corruption. Rebecca, serving 15 years in federal prison, had attempted to contact Thomas multiple times, each letter returned unopened. Victor Blackwood, facing a 30-year sentence, had been forced to watch his family legacy dismantled, the Blackwood name becoming synonymous with corruption rather than success. Thomas occasionally reflected on the strange symmetry of it all, how his professional life had been saved by the very betrayal that had destroyed his personal life. How destruction had ultimately led to renewal. "You never fully recover from betrayal," he told his students in his ethics seminar. "But you can build something new atop the ruins, something that honors your scars rather than denies them." The greatest security comes not from impenetrable walls, but from systems designed to remain standing even after breach. As he packed his notes after class, Thomas glanced at his phone, a message from Elena suggesting dinner at their favorite restaurant to celebrate her new book contract. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. Thomas smiled to himself as he replied, confirming their plans. The past could not be erased, but neither would it dictate his future. The architecture of his new life was proving more resilient than he could have imagined from within the wreckage of the old.